Good morning, everyone, and welcome back to At World's Edge, the fantasy lore podcast where we discuss the lore behind some of your favorite IP. Today, we're going to be expanding our playlist on fantastical scholarship and answering the age-old question of every first-time Lord of the Rings reader. Why is there so much singing in this story? We didn't see too much of it on Peter Jackson's adaptations, but if you haven't cracked open the Hobbit, Lord of the Rings series, or the collected Silmarillion, please do so. All of those italicized, center-aligned blocks of text are actually singing and poetry. We'll be talking about not only where you can find examples of fantasy singing, but why they exist and the function that they perform both in universe and out. Without further fanfare, let's jump into it. As stated, singing, poetry, and verse are all present throughout a wide range of fantasy IP. We discussed Lord of the Rings, in which some or all of the major characters reveal some singing chops, sometimes in parts of the story where a modern audience is a bit like, is singing what you really want to be doing right now? Bards or traveling minstrels are a mainstay of the D&D universe as well, appearing since the very first incarnations of that game series. Jaskier or Dandelion of Witcher fame was a major component of bringing that series to life for modern audiences, as were the various songs from Game of Thrones. Both of these series benefited from the earworms they birthed on screen, but in the stories themselves, the written versions, the songs and poems were clearly reflective of both characters and events. Finally, in games such as Skyrim, the skald-like bards of the Elder Scrolls universe could be heard setting the mood and revealing interesting backstory throughout the taverns and towns of the world. So for a little history here, why is there singing in the fantasy worlds we create? Well, most of that goes back to the heart of what most fantasy genres are, dark or cracked mirrored reflections of humanity's past, usually how we would like to imagine our medieval or ancient worlds. And in those times, the only way to transmit information was via spoken word. There is a great Norse story of Odin learning through suffering how to write runes, and understanding their power was too great for even gods to hoard, he taught humanity to read and write as well. This is because without reading or writing, our only communication with the past is remembering stories and retelling them. This is true throughout cultures without strong written language traditions. As anyone who learned their ABCs remembers, learning even long-form concepts like 26 letters is easier with a poem. You all know the feeling of trying to remember what comes after O without saying the poem to yourself in your head, and it's embarrassingly long to do. So poetry and song was incredibly important as a vessel for knowledge in the time periods we're talking in, and authors like Tolkien incorporated that into the stories they wrote to reflect this reality. So from a literary perspective, though, so meaning why is this good for the person reading a book, songs give a chance for exposition without breaking the fourth wall, or without breaking the fourth wall, essentially. Stories have to follow a track, a map, if you will, showing us character development as told through the events they experience. When context is needed, an author can either have the character talk to another character about it, or they can think about it and essentially talk to the audience. When the concept is too esoteric, though, these methods can really take the audience out of where they are. Gimli expounding on the history of the dwarves to the Fellowship would have made him sound a bit long-winded and more scholarly than his gruff but practical character was in the stories, but having him recall the Song of Durin was a great way for audiences to learn about Moria and why the dwarves are so dour without having to make a spectacle of it. The same is true for the recurring stanzas of Hands of Gold that Tyrion Lannister recalled throughout his time in King's Landing, which revealed how his feelings towards women and power were not as clear-cut as his outward appearance suggested. From the character standpoint, so imagining that the characters are alive and have needs and wants of their own, the value of singing mirrors the real world very closely. Remember as you watch this on your mobile device that in all of these worlds there is no cell service, and just like our ancestors, these characters would either be alone with their thoughts or talking to others, perhaps much more than we do in our own world. Groups of people doing a repetitive task, like marching or working, use songs to pass time and maintain rhythm. Think the song the seven dwarfs were singing while they were mining in Snow White as a great example of this. The characters are doing something boring, but also need to stay in time together, so they sing. There's also, of course, entertainment. Jaskier Dandelion was a superstar of his age, and the Bards College of Skyrim was a famous institution as well. Just like people in our world, people in the past liked listening to stories, and modern folk singers like Billy Joel have extensive playlists talking about ways of life that are disappearing. And more ancient cultures of folklore will have songs so famous that we listen to them for entertainment long after the real reason for remembering them is gone. And finally, as in real life, sometimes you just need to sing to express yourself. Although being Edwardian age written characters and not bound by the type of toxic masculinity seen in modern creations, Tolkien's Aragorn, Legolas, and Gimli reach new emotional crescendos when singing the Lament of Boromir over the loss of their comrade. Singing in this case was a way for the characters to express their grief in ways regular words would not have sufficed. So what value does this singing have to you as a gamer? Well, we've primarily talked about literary works. Many of you enjoy gaming and roleplay, but may be hesitant to make your D&D group sing for 5 minutes as they explore a dungeon. Remember all the things we talked about. These songs and poems can be devices for storytelling. They can be ways to set the mood, and finally they can be ways to allow your group to impart some of their own creative personality into the characters in a way that will stick with the minds of their fellows. Thinking about Jaskier again, his character would be an excellent way to avatar a player in your gaming group, and that's something to keep in mind as you're as a games master or a dungeon master as you're creating these worlds for them. All right, well, thank you. I hope you all enjoyed this video. Thank you for watching and for carrying me across the 100 subscriber mark. I think you can all tell that clearly I'm not doing this for the money, and I'm just happy that you're enjoying the work. You all have a great day, and keep tuning in.